Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you today?
It looks like your voice is sounding a
Good
little
morning.
better. But on the heel.
A little bit more with it today, yes.
Was it
Excellent.
positive?
It is.
Our main topic for today will be talking around the Power BI skills matrix produced on Power BI Tips back in 2021. And now that we have Fabric, we probably should revisit that a little bit. Take another look at this. What other skills do we see happening or occurring? And would you add things to it, I guess, would be maybe the context here as well. I think since 2021, I think I've got a lot more ideas around how to enterprise deploy and roll things out. So I for sure, I've got some additional roles or people that I would like to add to that role in that skills matrix as well. All right. That being said, let's jump right on in. Let's go to some news. Tommy, we've got two major blogs coming out today. It's interesting that they're still running kind of like two blogs in parallel here. There's the Power BI blog has just recently announced the July 2024 feature update. And then we also get the Fabric July update. Anything else here that stood out to you?
Yeah. So to your point, everything in the Power BI blog, everything is in the Fabric blog.
Yeah.
It's a copy paste.
Yes.
I think it's really the Fabric that's stealing the month in terms of some major updates. But let's give love to our Power BI. Because of course, it's PowerPoint is one of the big updates here.
Mm-hmm.
New exporting to PowerPoint dialog in the service. A few updates to modeling in terms of the DAX query view can utilize Live Connect, which is awesome.
Which I really like. Honestly,
yeah.
Of the things that have been added to desktop recently, this was a pretty major add, I feel like, in recent times. Being able to see tables and run DAX, that changes a lot of how I interact with a model nowadays. And I really like this. They just added the new button. I think you're going to get there, Tommy. There's a new button where you can, a couple things. You can script out a measure and all of its dependencies into the DAX query view. So you right click on a measure and say, show me the definition of this measure and any dependent measure that this thing relies on. So you may have sum of sales that may be used in some kind of division, and maybe you have some kind of other, calculation where you're filtering things or whatever the thing may be. It lists them all out on desktop.
Yeah.
You can make edits to them. You can run queries against them. And then you can update all of them at once. So if you want to edit 3-4 measures that are in a chain of dependencies, you can do that. I think this is really a slick feature.
It's Tabular Editor Lite.
Mm-hmm.
Really what it is. So
yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I'm not sure where. I think this is very much has been needed for DAX in general. And I actually saw a funny little not text message, a Twitter post or X post from Marco Russo. He said, I had recently gone on and had to use MDX for a project. And I quickly realized tabular editing in DAX is way easier than doing MDX. So I thought, good to know. Even though DAX is hard, MDX is worst. So
oh my gosh.
There's other worse patterns you could follow that are out there. Anyways, I really like this. I think you're right. This is Tabular Editor Lite. I like this feature a lot.
The biggest updates, I think, for Power BI are, oddly enough, not even in the Power BI blog. I don't know if you caught it. So, of course, like every month, but especially this month, there's some major updates in the Fabric blog.
Of course.
But one thing I think that kind of, I don't know why it wasn't included in Power BI is paginated reports. An
with
API now.
Parameters.
Yes. Like
why
kind of a big thing.
Okay. Have you tried to build parameters in paginated reports in the report? The
report builder.
In the report builder program that you download? I still
what
get
language is that?
It's DAX, I think.
No, it's not DAX.
XML?
It has its own separate documentation on Microsoft.
I don't like it.
It's all part of the old pagination experience.
Yeah.
SRS. Create old parameters. You're usually deriving them from separate queries, right?
Only people with lots of gray hair will know how to do this. I don't know how to do this. Anyways, the desktop, the application, the RDL builder on desktop is awesome. It does a ton of things. It's super cool. I don't need all that. I just need a table of data with a handful of parameters. I don't even need to add, I mean, it looks like there's going to be when you go to the service side of things, it looks like you're going to be able to add images and add a text box at the top and like make tables and like you can make a header, you can make a footer. It feels like a lot of the simple features that you need to add have been added to the service. I'm very pleased about this one. Also, very excited about that as well. I think that's been a really big win.
It'll be interesting to see how many of those. So all of these were properties on a properties tab pane, right? That you could just scroll through endlessly and like configure, and you still can. But that was the old paginated experience, like or SSRS. Like it'll be interesting to see which ones of those they deem important enough to pull out into this, right? Where it's like a more top level button.
Yes.
That's easy to click and add and do things with, as opposed to just leaving it excuse me, buried in the panel.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would imagine the end game here. I don't know how fast the team's going to be able to move with this because I don't know how many people work on the paginated report experience, but I would imagine their vision would be do everything in the service so that you don't even need to download paginated report builder for your computer anymore. I mean, I think that would be, if I had a vision from the Microsoft team, and this is what I said a long time ago. I said, look how big the program is for paginated report builder. It's a couple of megabytes in size. You download desktop now, desktop's like almost a half a gig in size. It's huge. So I'm thinking of all the programs and all the things you can replace, paginated report builder experience, that seems like a very lightweight experience to replace because it's a much smaller program. There's much less to it. It's kind of known how to build everything. So you're not innovating new icons, buttons, features, interactions. It's not an interactive paginated report. It's just kind of known. So I really hope they can complete that work and basically deprecate or get rid of the desktop application for paginated reports, because now all our Mac users can make paginated reports, which is what we've always wanted.
Did you just say like it's just kind of known how to do all that?
No. I mean, like there's no innovative features on the paginated report. We're not building like new visuals. We're not building new features of paginated reports. What I mean by it's known is how long's been paginated reports been around?
Long time.
Like 20, 30 years plus? I don't know. So
at least.
So I feel like after all that time, you should know how the product should work so people like it. So if you've got all the features in it right now, just make parity with what you have in the desktop application to what's in the service.
Well, it's interesting you say that, right? Because if I look at SSRS, right, the paginated report experience,
sure,
it's a developer focused experience.
It is
100%. What that means is like you not studying or not having a bunch of experience with paginated.
Yep,
is probably just because you haven't spent time like engaging in that report type.
100%. This is exactly what I'm saying. I don't know a lot about it.
I think what's interesting about that is we discuss a lot about the differences between roles and people engaged, and we're really excited in talking about the developer experience and developer tools and developer things with Power BI all the time.
Yep.
That there is this mix of not just personas, people using these tools, which is really going to be interesting with this conversation of like where you guys want to go with this matrix, Tommy, but outside of stealing all my ideas.
Yeah, you're going to be the bearer of
the difference. What is the balance, right? Like you're Mike from a outside perspective, not having spent a bunch of time with paginated, you'd like that kind of more UI experience where it like kind of lets you do the things really easily and quickly for the one-time paginated report you're going to build, right? Versus, maybe the other experience where, well, I could create a template and I could create all these properties that I can configure and deploy, and that's a wild difference. And it is interesting to me to be like, how do you create the tool sets or the UI presentation to fit both those needs now. Because you can't, like, what I'm saying is maybe you can't be as critical because, or can you, right? Because like, how do you develop a user experience that is being used by completely or wildly different personas?
That's a
right?
great question.
Yeah.
You add
It's
Dax
just more of
Purview
a
to it. That's
like
what you
a
do.
statement, right?
Yeah, you just
But you're right. You're right there, Seth. I mean, even in what we've done in the theme generator, we try to build it so it's very technical, right? You can do a lot of very technical things, but it's very easy and approachable as well. So we want to make it easy for you to click buttons, add features, see visuals update in real time. So we want it to be very simple, approachable for anyone. But then to your point, Seth, we also want it to be super technical. So we want the ability to have how do you say that? We want the ability to let you go into the code, see all the like there is a technical side to all this tool. We want to be able to expose that.
But at the same time, the big difference, and what's always been my slight frustration with the paginated reports, is the code that you're providing is the same code that you'd be doing anyways in a theme file. It's somewhat familiar in terms of what you're looking at.
Mhm.
Everything in paginated reports is starting from scratch, completely from scratch.
For the straight business user getting into the environment. Yeah.
Well, it's whatever the coding language and the functions are. I mean, you already got to know Dax. I got to know Power Query. I got to know SQL. And now I have to learn this new way, kind of syntax for paginated reports, which I feel like.
But you don't have to. That's the point. This is the part of the genius that Microsoft does with like Power Query. Here's a UI, drag and drop a lot of the things. 90% of what you need is at the surface level. It's already there. Under the hood, the whole paginated report is a very well-known XMLA documented thing that you can use and create code to generate the reports, right? It's a known standard.
Yeah.
So what I don't know, I think to your point, Seth, is in the web browser, how deep are we going to be allowed to go to get to that deeply technical side, right? I have a table. Will I be able to click each cell and format it, bold it, not bold it, add conditional formatting for what I need and all the little features of styling that I would want? I hope we get there. But this is also what I would say Microsoft is doing, and this isn't a very developer-centric thing, but you have VS Code. You can download to your desktop, but I can go to code.dev or dev.code and use VS Code in the browser. And the experience to me, the user, whether I'm in the browser or on the desktop, it's feeling extremely similar these days. And so what I think I'm getting at here is it should not really matter if I'm in a browser window or I'm on a downloadable desktop application. They should both have the same depth and capabilities that I would want. And I really hope they don't do with paginated reports what they did with desktop, where they made a whole bunch of like custom things. Like there's a whole bunch of visuals that are made by Microsoft, their custom way, their way of doing them. I really hope that they expose the code potentially, or an editor, or here's the UI, here's a GUI that lets you do 80, 90% of all the things. But if you really want to tweak something or dial it in or change it or adjust it, here's the code button. Here's the code behind the scenes. For you technical users, you can go in and just write very detailed code to make the paginated reports. I hope that's where they're going. I don't know if there's a lot of value in that because Microsoft has to build what people want to buy, essentially. If there's no one using that feature, like why would you have that feature exist? Other than to say you can do it and everyone now is happy. I don't know. Maybe I went on a random tangent there.
I think that's a topic for another day as
Okay.
that comes out. I do want to mention one of the major updates, one of the greatest updates to Fabric is now in preview. GitHub is available for source control.
Woohoo!
Actually, the flyers and the
we need, again, all these sound effects that we have stored up here in the background. We'll add those for you. There's that little, what's that little meme sound? The little yay.
Yeah. So this is significant to me because I think a lot of more often than not users already have a good handle on GitHub, and DevOps, while very similar, I think this is going to open up both the open source part of this from the community point of view, but also how many organizations really run with GitHub internally and what they do, and also all the features that GitHub has available. So I'm really excited about this because it's seamless with VS Code in terms of extensions for it. I did go down that path of trying to find Azure DevOps extensions. Surprisingly, not a ton. Microsoft.
No, there's not.
So yeah,
I mean, there's a couple things here. So I maybe want to jump in. Let me hang on to that one. So let's go through the rest of the blog. If there's any other things that stood out to us, because I do want to. That is my, my other feature here that we're talking about today. I do want to visit this. This is my beat from a street. I did a demo on this week, and it went really well, and I really like the feature of it. So I want to take that as my beat from the street when we get to the rest of the blog. Any other things that stood out to us on the blog?
The only other thing is some capacity pools and environment stuff for data science.
I like that. I've been playing with that. You can push your notebooks to a different version or start designing different versions of your nodes you're using. I wish there was a little bit more way of, so if you think about your capacity or your compute units that you have inside your Fabric environment, I kind of want a little bit of I think this is what you're doing with these. When you use capacity pools for Spark, you can specify how big you want Spark to become. And on some instances, especially when we're talking Fabric, I'm paying a dedicated amount of compute units, right? If I'm paying for an F64, I get 64 compute units per second for an entire month. So I think it roughly comes out to like, if you're on F64, I think it's like 50 million or something like that, 50 million compute units. I'm not sure, 7 million. I can't remember the number. Anyway, it's some big number. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to say, look, my Fabric capacities or any of the notebook capacities in Fabric are always limited to this threshold. And what I'm finding right now is there's not a lot of way of throttling different workloads by how much capacity I'm expecting it to use. For example, if I'm running a series of notebooks, I would rather have some of those notebooks run longer as opposed to finishing sooner, so that way I don't accidentally overrun or push my capacity into smoothing, and I need them to run a bit more strategic. So I'm not sure if we're going to get there yet, but I really am liking this new configuration. You can add your own libraries. You can kind of preset things. You can grab the preview version of Spark. I think we're at Spark 2.3.2, 3.1. I don't remember what it was, but there's a new version that's in preview right now, which you can go get early. You can make these Spark definitions. So I really like that.
The only last thing I want to mention, because again, there's always a ton of these Fabric ones. I actually had a conversation with someone on the Microsoft team about this a few months ago, but the thing that really runs notebooks in Fabric is the MS Spark Utilities package or function. It's really what allows you to seamlessly connect to your data. It has all the functions that you would need to do. The only problem is if you wanted to utilize that and push things in VS Code, you can't, because MS Spark is only in the Fabric environment or when you're in the interface. So there's a new MS Spark new API. I'm definitely going to be diving into this, where you can get, at least right now, just information about the live session. So hopefully this is the first step to actually that Spark utilities becoming something that you can use outside of the Fabric environment.
I'm going to point out a couple other things here that I want to just quickly note on. I like that update, Tommy. I think it's a good one. You can now edit your JSON code for data pipelines. So you have a data pipeline. You need to make a quick edit. My developers who work on pipelines fairly frequently tell me, Michael, just go in and stop trying to click on the activity. Just go into the code and edit the code. We could not do that before. You want to rename something. You want to change a quick connection string. You want to see all the parameters. Once you get into data flows a bit deeper, you can see everything. It's easier in code just to kind of skip to the section you want and look at it. Well, now you can edit that code in the pipeline, which is huge. I think it's a major win. And again, this is what I was talking about earlier, Tommy, about the paging reports.
Yeah.
It was, here's the GUI, here's the UI, that's all clean and pretty. Oh, by the way, we're actually generating code behind the scenes. And if you want to see it, here's the edit button. Like, to me, that makes sense. That's what we should be doing. We should be exposing all the simple things first, and then here's the under the hood button to go down and edit stuff. So I like that feature. The other thing I would say on the note here as well, I don't know do you follow who's Mim? Do you follow Mim at all on Twitter or X?
Yeah,
so, Mim has been raving about the new Lakehouse schemas now in public preview. So you can create schemas now inside your Lakehouse. So you could think of this as like a folder that then collects a bunch of tables, but it's all built inside. It's got 3-part naming schema. So this is almost verbatim what I think Databricks is doing, or what Lakehouses do in general. You have the name of the Lakehouse as the first part. Then you have the schema that it holds itself under. And so by default, all of the Lakehouses get a DBO schema. And then you can make a new schema for like customers, finance, marketing. And I hope, and I haven't seen it yet, but I hope we get to a place where we can manage access to individual schemas in the Lakehouse. So here's a bunch of tables that exist. And to be honest, this fixes one of the problems I build today. I make a Lakehouse, but I make 3 of them. I make 3 Lakehouses, one for bronze, one for silver, and one for gold. If I can restrict the schema, like the users that can access a schema on a Lakehouse, I don't need to have 3 different Lakehouses now. I can have one Lakehouse with 3 schemas. This is the schema for bronze, here's the schema for silver, and here's a schema for gold. And now you can move those tables or put them in places that are curated inside the same Lakehouse. I think this makes a lot of sense. And it mirrors a lot of the other experiences that I've been doing inside Lakehouse development elsewhere. So, Mim, you're right on point. I really like this feature. I think it's great. I need to play with it a bit more. It's still in preview, so I guess it's going to be a bit dodgy. Maybe there's some bugs and some things that are not quite there yet. So stay tuned for that. But I'm really excited around Lakehouse schemas. How excited are you about Lakehouse schemas?
Oh, it's just the most exciting thing.
Oh, that's funny. Anyways, any other notes or thoughts around the recent blog posts?
Should move on.
Okay. I was waiting for an answer or response. I'll just let it be a little sad.
I was just waiting for timing to say, oh, and one other really cool thing.
I'm sorry, it's a big deal.
Oh, what other cool thing?
Yes.
A lot of cool things.
I am excited to see how many new things are coming out through Fabric. It is definitely hard to keep up with all of them. I'll be honest. Like, I had a hard time when Power BI was going full force and updating itself. And now we have all these things in Fabric. So interesting there. Let's move on to our main topic. Our main topic today is coming directly from our website, powerbi.tips. And so we're going through the skills matrix. Maybe I should have Seth kick it off here. Give us kind of a 1-2, Seth. What is the skills matrix? Why do we care about it? And what are we talking about changing here for Fabric?
Yeah, I think, well, originally, it's probably doing the same thing here, right? There was a whole series of articles that I did, and one was when you had so many people saying that, they were experts in Power BI, and what does that mean, Lark? Or you're looking for somebody who knows how to do Power BI. And what was kind of lacking that I thought this would really be helpful for was, how do we assess our own skills within Power BI, as well as allow organizations to kind of vet people like, hey, Power BI, what areas are you really good in? Like, because bigger Power BI teams have differing needs, right? Sometimes you can specialize in certain areas because I may need a model expert. I mean, I may need, you to performance tune things to the umpteenth degree because I only got a limited spend and I want to do a lot. So I'll spend it on you instead of, capacity. So what this is, kind of a first in a 3-part series of different things, but ultimately it was designed to kind of highlight some focus areas and then allow individuals to kind of rate themselves across those areas based on, the high level, right? So for I have to remember that we're talking to people on podcasts as well as not presenting something. So it's like on the top level headers, right? Connect and transform, model, visualization, admin and architecture, and embed in custom visuals. And then on the levels, right, 1 through 10, in each of the cells, right, of this matrix, you'd have a description of what that individual should know to gain that score. And it's kind of additive. So as you go down, you would obviously assume they know all the skills prior to that. So you can kind of rate yourself or rate individuals, in a how well do you know Power BI sense.
I think this is at a time, Seth, we kind of developed this. I think we kind of came up with the initial idea and we kind of spitballed some ideas back and forth on this one. But this was in a time when we were really reviewing or doing a lot of interviews of people. So this came in a time for us where we needed to hire talent. And I still take some technique from this. I learned something from this and I use it now when I help companies hire people. I do this regularly. I regularly am on the technical side of the interview. And to be very clear, this is a service. I mean, there's an opportunity for people who know the space to help companies who don't know the space as well, to really get a gauge for like, what do people know? Like, what should they be learning? And so when I do this, it's some people, it sounds like a conflict of interest at times. And let me give you some color here, right? Hey, we have this consultant here. This consultant's getting money from us to do work. Oh, and by the way, he's going to help us hire new people. Well, your initial thought, or at least my initial reaction would be is, oh, this consultant's going to always say everyone's insufficient. They don't know what they're talking about. They have no clue what's going on. What I feel like is better to do as a consultant being hired by companies to help them find the talent, right? It's helpful for me to go through and say, here are the areas that this person is strong in. They have a clear understanding in these areas. And what I recommend to these clients is, here's areas that I think they're weak and will need training in. These are the types of topics that you build in your environment that this person has not touched, they don't have skills on, and would need some education on. So it's not, I'm not saying don't hire them. It's more like, here's an evaluation of the person. And when I do these evaluations, I'm sneaky. So if you're ever getting interviewed by me, for those of you who are looking for jobs and I potentially show up on the interview board, I will ask you 5 questions at the beginning of the interview. And I'll say, rank yourself 1 to 5, how good you are in the service, in data modeling, in visual building, in administration, in Power BI embedding, because these are I ask you initially to say, like, how confident are you in these areas? Because what that tells me is, if you're extremely confident in data modeling, I'm going to ask you really hard questions in the data modeling area. If you are really confident in administration of Power BI, I'm going to ask you a lot of technical questions around architectures that work for small, medium, and large businesses. I'm going to really dig into those areas that you feel confident in, because to your point, Seth, I think there's an overconfidence of, oh, I build reports in Power BI desktop, therefore I know everything about Power BI. And there's a lot more that goes to this. The tool is becoming incredibly large. And now I have to ask questions around, what do you know in data engineering? How do you handle, have you played with Spark before? Do you know what you're talking about when you talk about notebooks? Give me some of your favorite Python libraries. Like, if you can't answer some of these basic questions, I'm thinking you don't have the experience.
So I'll tell you, I've evolved that a little bit.
I like it.
And more so, I know you like it because
it's good. We came up with it to begin with.
So the evolution is, what we identified with people is, especially in an interview, you want to impress. So what typically happens is people will overinflate themselves.
100%.
So the problem is, if you're using those questions all in the beginning, then it's already in that overinflated state, and you're not getting any value from those metrics, really. So what I've done is, rather than I've modified that, rather than asking all those questions right up front, I will do it per segment of whatever I'm interviewing for them, because the first one will be overinflated, and typically,
I see,
interviewers will know that they overstepped and just walked into a realm that is really uncomfortable. Because if you're saying you're a 10 out of 10 in DAX, we're starting at 10. And if you're not nailing 10
level questions,
right. So
tell
then
me how you manage perspectives using the tabular editor, right?
So then, like, typically what I'll try to do, and this is a people thing, right?
Yes.
Because I want, like, as an interviewer, you have a limited amount of time to engage and see a person.
It's
So
hard.
you have to get as much of an accurate representation of just what they know. You're picking up on personality and team fit
sure.
and all that while you're doing it. But that's why usually, like, the first section is the one I care least about, because I want an accurate rating for themselves.
Yes.
I want to know what those challenge areas are. I don't want to just assume.
Yes.
So the second, third, and fourth are the ones that, like, after the first one, typically people will be like, yeah, I'm a 10. The second one, they'll be like, I'm like a 5 or 6. You
It's a
know,
little more
like,
real.
okay, great,
Yeah.
right. Like, let's start there,
we're
right? And then all of a
calibrating
sudden,
ourselves.
we calibrate out where we need to be. So that I found extremely helpful, Mike, and maybe you can use that.
I like that. I did never really anticipated, so I almost kind of look for those. I'm going to propose a counter perspective to what you're doing, right? So
Okay.
I like the idea of using the numbering system before you hit the section that you're going through, and you get that kind of, that first number you get potentially is a bit unrealistic based on your questions that you ask them, and they realize, oh shoot, I'm talking to an MVP here. He really does know his stuff. I better not make up anything moving forward. So it feels like that first number, it's kind of like what do they call it? The dog pancake? What do they call it?
Dog pancake.
Dog
I've never heard of this.
Yeah, it's when you make pancakes, the first pancake you make is no good, and you just feed it to the dog. It's like it's the pan's not quite hot enough. You didn't have the right mix, right? And so it's a dog pancake, right? You give that one to the dog, and then you make the other one. So it's like a throwaway data point. You have it, but you can't trust it, kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other data points make sense. So on one hand, you hurt yourself in that first one because they're actually changing how they behave for the later ones.
That's what I'm saying. Like, the first section is one I don't care about, typically. Or it's an easy, not an easy section, but it's like a technical area that I have less need of.
Okay, and then what I feel like is, if you do that, so it makes sense, totally makes sense there. But if you ask all of them up front, they're going to overinflate all of the areas, but at least they're thinking about them in the same limelight. Like, if I ask about, so I can gauge measure 1 to measure 2, measure 3, measure 4, because I haven't tainted them. I haven't given them feedback yet early in the process to let them know like how good or not good they are.
Regardless, like, I think this conversation and what the Matrix are trying to do are help quantify, right? People or help people understand the concepts of, like, what it is we're talking about. What are all the different areas, and help us end up in a better space as an individual or a business.
Sure.
Yeah, contrary to popular belief, the skills matrix was not created to be a bunch of booby traps. Even though
no,
it's not. It's not.
Even though it's a great way to do so, kind of thing.
Yep.
Really, I actually just had a conversation with a client yesterday, and we're utilizing that for on-ramping a lot of their team in Power BI. Because they're like, where do we start? There's a ton of things to do. And it's like, okay, let's build some milestones and let's see if you can get to level 3 or level 2. Mm-hmm. And that's always so impactful, because I've said this a ton on the podcast before. There's a ton of other industries out there that actually have levels of skill that can actually be measured, and we don't. So what Seth did,
we had to make our standard.
We had to make our standard.
Yeah.
And that's, huge, because at least it gives you somewhere to go. It's not a be all end all, but my goodness, it at least gives you somewhere to aim. And we're utilizing the skills matrix through their journey. And this was and I thought Power BI was complicated, because I had so many skill languages and different parts of the brain to use.
I will agree there. And another thought around this one too. So if I had to go back, this is a 2021 version of a skills matrix. What would I have changed? What would I change now looking at it? And what would I enhance or add to it? I think I've actually done a couple sessions in our online governance class, training.tips, around skills matrix and what skills we see them needing in companies. I feel like I'm adding a lot more skills around, we're generalizing more of the skill set, right? There's administration, I feel like is a good one. We have the skill matrix today has an administration column in it today. I think there's another one around data engineering, or more we're expanding to pipelines, notebooks, data flows online. So this is where things I think get a little bit weird in some cases, because I could easily, I think, push towards the person who's the data modeler. They could do a lot of those skills, but there are some techniques that might not be in that data modeler realm that you want to give to an actual data engineer.
Yes.
Then there's like the report builder. Okay, so someone who can build reports. What does that skill set look like? What features of desktop do you know how to use, and can you correctly articulate the use of those features and maintain things? And then there's this one called the release manager. I'm working more and more with companies that have, when you start thinking about central BI teams that have a central location, a COE, and maybe a COP that runs a standard set of data elements through the organization. I think you really do need someone who's going to be a little bit of a program manager and someone who's going to be pushing the team to say, complete your work in development. I will move it from test to production. And while that's just a persona, that's not a person. You don't need to hire one person to only move content through. But I think there's a set of skills that are using more of that continuous integration, continuous development pattern on how to automate this stuff. And now with Git, like we just talked about this morning, Tommy, GitHub is much more technical. You're going to have to write a lot of code. You're going to have to understand how to integrate with Azure DevOps or GitHub if you want to become more of that larger enterprise team regularly pushing out content. So I think the roles in my mind are changing and expanding. I don't see a lot of organizations asking for skills around data science yet in Fabric. Right. That doesn't seem to be a thing. I'm not hearing that on the street at this point. It's more about, we need data engineers, we need data modelers, we need report builders. Those are the main skill sets that I think organizations are clamoring for. And I also realize not every organization needs the same skill set. So we say Power BI, we say Fabric, but there are organizations that need a much heavier emphasis on notebooks and Spark, and others need a lot more on modeling and report building. And so there's potentially existing teams that are going to own other portions of this tech stack. It's getting so blurry nowadays. It's really interesting to see how this is changing.
Before I say anything else, Seth, when you were creating the skills matrix, were you thinking that in the realm of a certain persona or multiple personas? Were you thinking of one type of person, or were you trying to kind of touch on a bunch of different people's roles?
Geez, Tommy, I mean, it's 2024 and that was written in 2021. So let me go rip up my note.
There's a point to this.
It's not generalized.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think when we did this, there was no Fabric at the time. There was no concept. Like the idea was
just in the context of Power BI.
It was just Power BI.
Picking points of interest of like, okay, the more like when you get into level 10, it's talking about, have you read all of Marco
Russo's documentation?
Right? That sort of thing. So it's not, hey, you're a developer in the developer world coming from PageNated. Hey, you're a business user like looking at this. It's just a generalized view of the Power BI ecosystem.
Okay. Because I've been actually working on content for training around Fabric, and the biggest part is, which rabbit hole do you go down? Because each of these they're really their own career. And they have been their own career.
And they absolutely could be. And even in the existing matrix, right? And that was my point, is you could, because a lot of other parts of this are people asking like, well, what should I study? What should I look at? Like what part of Power BI I get really good at? And we were addressing questions all the time. Like, well, I mean, it's always really good to know SQL because that's a lot of the source systems, anything you're going to interact with and play. Like, you have to know some Power Query. DAX is going to be your king. Like, if you know DAX and modeling, like, you're going to have a lot better time. And you could hyper focus on modeling in DAX and be a high level professional, like make a career out of it, like Marco and Alberto, right? And they're highly sought after individuals who know how to performance tune modeling or models as opposed to just create them, right? And create a DAX measure and not understand that you just like the nuance of when you're implementing new DAX code, what it's doing to the tabular model, as opposed to just getting it to run, right? And most folks are in the just get it to run aspect. And so it's like you can go way down those things if you like to hyper focus on a subject, or you could incrementally just go across the board, right? Like you can be a jack of all, right? All trades, not master of none kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So as I was going through and kind of, again, the core crux of thinking about the skills matrix today, I think rather than trying to figure the entire matrix out and what it would look like, I think the big question for a lot of people, and probably for myself too, is, are we creating one skills matrix for Fabric? Is this going to be under one umbrella? Because I think this is where we get into really, I know I can work in all the aspects of Fabric, but when should I? Because to your point, I may be kind of good at notebooks, but I can probably more easily break something because I've never done that for a career. It was very easy with Power BI to say, I'm going to do it all. I'm going to build models. I'm going to do the DAX. I'm going to do the visuals. I can even do some admin too. And that was one person. The overlapping of skills, while they were each unique to each other, wasn't terribly foreign. But I don't know if that's the case with Fabric. I'm right now, I'm leaning where there are going to be multiple skills matrix with Fabric. And I don't know if it would actually be even helpful to have a general one, because what would that really solve?
Well, it'd solve the questions of where your brain is stuck right now. Like, how do you conceptualize Fabric, right? So like the value of compiling all that together, and a matrix is just a way in which you can conceptualize, oh, okay, like these things fit in these buckets, right? Like that makes sense to me, or it doesn't, and it doesn't align. So on a high level, could you put Fabric into a matrix? Yeah, absolutely you could. Could you take any one of the columns I had from the original matrix and blow it out into its own matrix? Of course you could, right? Like every one of those could be, do you know this specific function? Do you know what it does? Do you know what happens when you implement it? Do you know, like that rabbit hole goes deep, man.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think that's why I like to center on like these larger principles of what you need to get done in your business, right? This is where I think this makes more sense. There's a data modeling persona that maybe incorporates connect, transform, modeling data, and maybe even some lightweight pipeline work, maybe some notebook work. That might make sense for that data modeler to be able to shape and move data around. I think there's a report builder experience, because the person who I find that people that can model data really well don't necessarily always make the best looking reports, because they focus on the technical side of getting the data to work correctly. I don't think you can find people that do both, but it doesn't need to be an exclusive like skill set that's all together. So I think that's another persona. I think administration and architecture of the system, that's another skill, because the number of people who come in and don't understand data security labels and workspace design and thin models and a semantic model, right? Splitting your workspaces between models and thin reports. These are strategies that companies use to make themselves become more efficient and easier to manage content. And as your team grows in size from small to large, you need to employ more of these techniques to divide the work across the team. If you have everything living in a model and report all in one element, it's not efficient to work that way as a team. You can't have only one person only working on the model and report all the time. And especially if we're building we're investing into PowerBI.com, I feel like that's another place where we want one model, many reports. That's the goal here.
Right.
Building reusable content. That's the expectation. So depending on what your organization wants to do and where your existing team sits, companies have entire BI dev teams where there's a corporate structure that says, look, we will provide data to you in a lake from Databricks. Great. Now we have to decide where does the ownership line divide? And that's the part I think that's much more challenging to get your head around. And I'm really working on this idea or concept that between apps all the way down to the tables, there's so many layers of the onion that you can give control to other teams to build stuff. And Fabric makes this incredibly easy to then distribute and share content across teams now. We don't have to start operating in single silos. Now it's a matter of, does the team I'm giving access to my shortcuts in a lakehouse, do they have the skills to even utilize what we can give them now? The technology, I think, has evolved faster than potential skills of other teams. So I need, to your point, Tommy, I need a skills matrix to at least come in and say, look, tell me what you know. What of this space do you have information about? And then we can then make the assumption or the analysis to say, here's the gaps we should work on. Let me work with you on the lake house, the shortcuts. Let's talk about the SQL serverless, the SQL Server, SQL Analytics endpoint. How do you use that? Where do you use notebooks? Let's do some basic skills there. Okay, run away, go build some stuff. Let's see what you come up with. And maybe then we can have a better conversation on what our organization looks like. But this is different for every org.
And if you were to say, if I were to have a hot take today, I think
here we go.
I think we'll see how you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I think creating a general fabric matrix, a skills matrix, does more harm than good. If you were to say, we're going to have a general fabric matrix that generally covers every part of the product. And here's why I'm actually going to actually back this one up rather than just trying to light a fire. We all know that the areas that we're talking about, data engineering and analytics, they're critical to the business. And I may have a general idea how it works. I may be able to create one, but do I know what happens in a fire? Do I know how to accidentally delete everything? So just because I'm aware of some features in some of the skills does not make me in any way able to own and run with it, especially if I'm going to claim this as my career. There's maybe a knowledge matrix that would be more appropriate, but I think it does more harm than good because it just gets people the assumption that they know these products when, again, there are people who intimately do this day in, day out with data engineering. Mike, you know that. So we'll go, I've done a few notebooks. I know Medallion. Right. But also the complications can go into it. So I would stay away from creating a general fabric skills matrix. That is the hot take.
So let me quantify this. If you go I'll just give it an analogy of what I think is happening in other places, right? If you go into statistics, there is a number of really smart people at the top of the statistics platform building things called black belt. If you want to become someone who deals with statistics and is recommending things for companies, you likely are going through some sort of black belt training. You get certified in it, and it's a rigorous class. You study it. You take tests on it. They make sure you test your knowledge. Ultimately, I think we're going to be getting to that place where organizations are going to require, right? So the organization doesn't know the skills of these people and what they need to know. The organization will continually go to a third party, a body, some other organization. And I'm trying to build some of that with training.tips. These are the standards. These are the informations that you need to know to be able to be capable in these areas. So the whole goal of our YouTube channel, the whole goal of our website has all been around educating people with experts who know things, who have gotten burned by, here's the fire drill, here's how things are happening. So if I look at it from the black belt standpoint, one, the Power BI world, the Fabric world, does not have standards or measurements that allow us to say we're able to gate people by skills based on a standard measure. Where should that come from? That should technically come from a collection of individuals that are leaders in the community or a nonprofit that's developing what that looks like. It's like the Marco Russos of the world, the Daniel O'Cares of Tabular Editors, the MIMS of the world. These individuals are experts in each of their own areas, and they're going to know the most, the Phil Seamarks of the world. They need to come together and say, these are the things that we recommend for best capabilities in these spaces. And I think while that doesn't exist, it doesn't make me want to shy away from making skills matrix of what I've experienced and what I find works well for organizations. So I think there is, regardless, I think you need to have some sort of North Star, some sort of measurement, some sort of experience-based things. And if you're worried about, does this person know how to handle this in a fire? That's part of the skills matrix. That's part of your skilling. How do you debug XYZ things? When this thing starts failing, what do you do? How do you get to the answer? That's part of the skills matrix. So, I mean, I think that is a skill that users would need to know in that area. So, I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to say it's not dangerous. I'm going to say it is important that you do it. I think what is dangerous, though, is where do you get your information from? Where is the standard being built from? And I think that is what I'm kind of trying to point on. Yes, you can generalize a lot of this information.
Yeah.
But who is your expert? Where does that live from? And I think a lot of this comes from the Microsoft Cat team. You're going to listen to Matthew Roach on how you deploy your organization because he's been doing this for 20 years. We've been learning from him, and we've been doing Power BI since it came out, 2015. So 9 years ago. So like from our standpoint, like we are still learning from experts that Microsoft has been doing, but you always look up to the people who've been doing it longer than you have because they likely have more experience in those areas.
Yeah, hard disagree. I mean, you lobbed one to me on Tuesday where I agreed with you, and
it's because you were under the weather. You didn't quite have your mind with you.
I know. I took advantage.
A delusional moment, but yeah, I mean, a hard disagree. Like I said before, like the skill matrix,
yes,
is nothing other than conceptualizing some concepts concretely and being able to quantify them. And if I can't do that, like you saying that makes me want to just go build this right now and publish something because I can.
But with Jack,
I think the important. Go ahead.
I was gonna say Jack in the comments is jumping on your point right there. Seth. Yeah. There's room for both generalists and the specialists. That's really good.
And I think one of there are two challenges that Tommy you brought up earlier and are still relevant. One is Fabric. And how does all of the roles fit into that? Like how do people navigate this space, etc. And I think my initial concerns around this like shifted back into like, guys, like nothing has changed. Like all it is we're just in a shared ecosystem.
Yes,
the same teams are doing the same stuff. It's just a matter of permissions.
Correct.
And if anything, BI devs and the original skills matrix still applies to Power BI devs for the most part.
Yeah.
Does that mean they don't see more in an ecosystem that now brings in essentially all of the data things that they were still in some degree, some way, shape, or form connecting to? Right? No, it's all in the same place, which is fantastic because now they can see all of the lineage and see how the ETL works if they need to, or whatever the case may be. That doesn't change their role in the organization, right? And I think just because it came together as rapidly as it did, I think we and many people are under the misconception like, oh my God, what does this do to everybody's, like lives and like our teams? And like, it doesn't do anything, guys. It just makes our lives better and easier because we can work within the same spaces. And the data engineer that is, can look at the model that you built when you were doing a quick POC for the business, can now understand, has access to that model, can look at the data sources and see how he needs to orchestrate and build his new data pipeline. And then he's just going to say, hey, we're going to reconnect to here, and boom, there you go. All within the same workspace. Right. So
amazing.
I think from a skills matrix perspective, I think you're bringing in like where like 2021 to now, I think it's a little bit more nuanced because the audience is much bigger. You now brought in a whole bunch of data centric people that may or may not be interested or may or may not be keyed into the business side of things into this ecosystem because it's engineering, it's architecture, it's data science. Like these are all of the things that were happening previously just in separate tooling. And now these teams and these people and these roles are all together. So I think that is what makes a generalized skills matrix even more important for Fabric, because the same way you've misconstrued things, and we did collectively by mashing them all together, just because all these things are together doesn't mean that all of these people and these skills got thrown away or have to cross train or learn or teams are going to change, etc. That's not the case, I don't think. I think it is very structured. It can be, we just need to lean into, okay, is the ecosystem set up in such a way that these teams can be easily plugged in to the places that they need to via permissions to share the things that they would want to across that ecosystem? Because the data engineers themselves are likely going to be part of the enterprise, right? Where there is data systems that are then shared with other individuals and teams and whatnot. And that would be like how you start to proliferate that data throughout the organization into the areas that it needs to be, but you're much more tightly coupled with the subject matter experts.
I would agree.
That's fair. And honestly, I love that response because, one, it's sometimes hard to think of a hot take, but I think this is good for people too. And I think that it's going to give a lot of people a sense of peace, man, because again, people are thinking, what do I need to have the skills of five industries, 5 careers all in one, and it's going to be on one stupid table? No. We know about how much this opens up, but I am looking forward for you to write that new skills matrix, by the way.
Exactly. Tommy had to write a new blog,
Yeah.
so we're doing that.
Right.
So
you want me to write it so you can? Yeah, never mind.
Well, it's more of like the we've just got to get it out because you've inspired me with fire under my heart to go write the blog and get the extra things out there.
Yeah, I think in general, like, the fantastic part about Fabric is we've got this new rich ecosystem of all the data things, right? And ultimately, it means the big data projects and all of the things that we would want to do are in a centralized location. The unanswered question is, how do you, maybe not unanswered, like not fully fleshed out in terms of process, is what I'd love to have is a realm where it's like, how do we like, what does it look like to deliver quick wins and then move that into a structured architecture as time goes on, right? Because you're going to have kind of a push pull, which kind of exists today, in that you want to deliver fast, but you're also maybe just connecting all those sources directly into Power BI. But the data engineers and the central BI team and, or the data team itself, right, has a warehouse, or it has these centralized data stores where they have 80% of all of the data you just connected to, but they don't have the 20%. In order for you to build your report, they need the 20%. Well, okay, that's new pipelines, new ETL added into the central data stores. It would be better that your model then connect to their central sources of certified data, right? Because there's SLAs and things behind that, and trust and whatever. And it's not, all your business logic isn't buried in your closed model silo of the ETL, right?
Yes.
So it's like, how do we talked about that for years, right? Even without Fabric, how do you take that and upgrade it? And I think like with Fabric, maybe hopefully there's a better opportunity to do that.
I'm very much in your corner on this one, Seth, because I think this is a major talking point when you're building these things. This is why I think the medallion architecture exists. There's a clear place to apply a large amount of business logic. And one of the notes here I think I'm making in my mind here around this is the reason the medallion architecture exists is because none of the data coming from your source system is going to match what you need to do in the report. So there's 2 major places where you place business logic. It's going to be measures and how the tables relate. And then it's going to be data transformations on the raw data, which is going to live in your silver layer. And I think that's why these zones exist, because if you're changing something fundamental, you can decide, okay, what kind of change do I need to make? Is that a change that can be handled by a measure? Then it goes to the model, the data mart, whatever you want to call it, right? If it's a more fundamental change, and I'm going to have to recompute something over and over and over again every time someone clicks on a visual, then that doesn't make sense to be a measure. It makes sense to materialize it or do that work one time upstream in the silver layer. So I think it's giving me more clarity on like where I should be doing these operations when you have a nice design for what zones do you do this work in. Love it. Really good conversation. Some really good comments here. I want to also note here, enterprise AR, you make a really good point around the difference between generalist and specialists is most companies won't pay for a generalist to kind of generally know all the things. Companies want to buy specialists in certain areas. You hire for specific roles and you look for someone to be an expert in an area. I find that to be very true as well. It's a good observation. All right. Anyways, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate this one. We really know that your time is valuable. We hope that you've enjoyed your walk or run or bike, whatever you're doing. Hopefully a good activity here as well. With that being said, we'd really like it if you found this information useful. Please go share the blog post around Skills Matrix. Let us know in the comments below what skills we're missing. What should we add? Is there anything that you experienced in your daily workflows that would be useful inside a Skills Matrix? We'd really appreciate and like to unpack that with you. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
Well, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have an idea, a question, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Excellent. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.